Hi, I'm Michelle Berry, and I am an environmental historian who teaches in the history department at the University of Arizona.
All right, Michelle, the question here is, what is manifest destiny?
Manifest destiny is an idea and an ideology. So it's the idea that there was, for the United States and for a particular segment of the United States, specifically Anglo or European Americans, a destiny that was manifested by God and pushed and sort of justified expansion from the East Coast to the West Coast.
Okay.
It's an ideology in that it was grounded in very racialized ideas about which ethnic groups in the United States were superior and which ethnic groups in the United States were inferior. And it was then used politically to justify a bunch of behaviors, everything from sort of genocidal behaviors of killing of American Indians or indigenous peoples to global war. So it's both an idea and also transforms kind of in the mid 1800s into an ideology.
Okay, so this started in the mid 19th century, right?
The term manifest destiny is coined in the early 1840s by a newspaperman named John L. O'Sullivan. But it really is an idea that hatched and came to the fore right early in colonialism from when the English come over to the United States, what was not yet the United States, what they termed the New World. Of course, it wasn't new to indigenous peoples. But as the English arrive, there's this notion that they're on a godly errand, and it's a specific sect of those colonists who think that they're destined by God to come to the New World, to America, to set up colonies and to build what they called a city upon a hill that would sort of serve as a model for civilizations across the world. And then that idea, so that's like 1607. So that's a long time between 1607 and 1840. But in that period of time, good things kept happening for the British, partly because of their superior firepower, and they sort of read into that this destiny from
like they were the
God.
superior, chosen,
they were the chosen
God-given people to spread the civilization to everybody.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was the destiny part was, this is inevitable thing given by God to the white settlers.
And in some ways it was fated, right? That history could not have fated. Yeah. History could not have taken any other path.
Right. This is just give way. This is happening.
Exactly. Right.
And that makes it that fits nicely into what you were saying about it becoming an ideology.
Yes.
Because when people have an ideology, they don't question it. They're not even aware of it.
That's exactly right.
It's just the truth to them.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And it fit nicely into sort of the racist ideas of the time that were being used to justify the continuation of slavery in the Deep South by people like this guy named John C. Calhoun from South Carolina. So it was used in really, really nefarious ways to justify what are probably, certainly people then, Henry David Thoreau among others, and now looked back on as being ethically suspect. So, for example, there was this notion that, of course, white Americans or Anglo-Americans would move to the West. So when the Indians died, that had to just be sort of a sign from God versus, sort of this intentional genocide that was happening at the hands of the federal government.
Right.
So it was used to shore up ideas about racial supremacy, even though the actions to shore up the racial supremacy were very intentional and very, very man-made.
But it was just, we're swept up in what's happening, and this is bigger than the both of us.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And so in the 1846, when the Mexican-American War starts, one of the justifications for going to war was that Mexicans, right, that were a mongrel race because they were a combination of
Spanish
American
and
Indians and Spanish, right? Yeah. And so they weren't quite European. And so there was this idea that if America came in and took over what was Mexico, which is actually where we're sitting when we sit in Tucson, Arizona, that action would help the sort of European part of Mexicans come to the fore, right? And so they would bring more of the European or the American culture and civilize Mexico and civilize the indigenous peoples as they go. And so that's kind of an example that justified a really big war that happened in Mexico, it happened in California, battles all over the Southwest.
Let's look at the map and go. Let's start with the colonies, the early part.
Okay.
And so these were the original colonies.
Right.
And then Manifest Destiny started about the time that they were going towards the Mississippi.
So in 1803, this had been
Louisiana Purchase here
by France, right? This sort of area, because Thomas Jefferson is trying very hard in 1803. He's the president at the time, to find a water route to the Pacific Ocean. Of course, he doesn't know it doesn't exist, but it doesn't really exist. But he buys Louisiana from France, and then he sends explorers and the Corps of Discovery, being led by Lewis and Clark, William Clark and Meriwether Lewis, out towards the Pacific Ocean, and it was this really
find the route to the Pacific.
Fascinating journey. Then they found all kinds of cool stuff, including prairie dogs that they sent back to Thomas Jefferson in a box. And they found some of the most amazing beauty that we have in the United States. They were the first to see sort of the Western Rocky Mountains, first Anglos, to see the Western Rocky Mountains in Montana, etc. So that opened up this part for westward expansion of the United States. And then from there, there's conflict with Mexico. Mexico gets its...
At the time, Mexico was including Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California.
Yep.
That was all Mexico.
Exactly. Nevada.
Right. This whole area was Mexico.
And they had gotten their independence from Spain in 1821. So it goes Spain, and then Mexico, and then after the Mexican-American War, which ends in 1848, gold is discovered in Northern California. And that really propels sort of the idea that the United States really wants to wants to link the coasts. They want to link gold with the East Coast.
And about the time of the Mexican War, there was the Oregon Territory was also added.
That's right, exactly right. Yep, and so
that's up in the northwest.
Yeah, exactly. And this was coveted because the Great Plains doesn't have any trees. So in the 1800s, trees are really important. They're important for heat. They're important for building stuff. They're super important. And so the notion that there was really nothing growing here and that the weather was really kind of intense.
It was the Great American Desert at the time.
It was called the Great American Desert.
Yeah.
And that it's interesting because so people sort of wanted to skip over it and get here. That was a much more moderate climate. It was much more water, right? This is all arid and dry, so it didn't have trees or water.
It was hard to cultivate.
Very difficult to cultivate, and it was mostly an agrarian nation in the early 1800s. So people wanted to farm. That was, there was some industry starting in places like New York City and Philadelphia, but for the most part, people were looking to expand the agricultural empire of the United States.
Okay.
So when they found gold, they wanted to go, and then eventually they want to build a railroad. The federal government gives a lot of money to private corporations to build a railroad, and a lot of that was justified in this is our destiny to expand across the continent.